Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions. With your host, Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's comes at us from a Czech guy, Snarky Puppy and Metropole Orkest, pushing the limits once again. This time with an album about dreaming and dreams written by Michael League in 20 days, rehearsed in 5. Between Worlds is a fitting title of the composition. Alright, I'm intrigued by this. One, Snarky Puppy, excellent every time I've checked him out, but also Between Worlds being a fitting title. What could we be looking at here? Is this the mix of the orchestra? Maybe a class? Actually, okay. I am familiar enough with this to know it exists. It has been on my radar, and I was actually going to check out some Snarky Puppy, I think it was last Friday, for new music, and something else came up in my email, so I wanted to give that priority. I'm glad we're getting to it this way, though, because I don't know when I would have been able to work this in. So I've been meaning to listen to this. I'm excited. Let's dive into this. This is the orchestral Snarky Puppy stuff. All right, let's do it. Ooh. I believe that's an oud. Someone correct me if I'm wrong on that, though. That's a violin. I got that one. So we're in a 5 here, which is interesting given the triplet pulse of the intro. This is in 3, though we have an accents on 3. Out of a group of 6. It's an interesting place to put it. Yeah, actually this is very cool. A bit of a romantic take on the classical side of things. With a very modern fusion of a lot of sounds. I mean, you saw the expanded percussion there, but we also have the oud, which is a non-Western instrument. Those are some wild. I mean, they're mutes on the trombones, but they had locking mechanisms. It's very whimsical, though. Beautiful. Toss it in some polyrhythms here and there on that drum kit. There we go. So it's still in 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Oh, so it's 3, 2, 2, 3. Oh, that harmonic shift too. I love the twinkling of the bells and chimes over here. Little vibrant stuff coming in underneath this. All the layers, a lot of little ideas coming together to form something huge. And the way that it's just washed over here. Oh, that ghost note roll was sick. It's so calming. That was an interesting electronic sounds. I saw a synthesizer, I think it was, earlier on. Oh, okay, the bassist is using it right now. Also, there's so many instruments in such a small place. Dude. Absolutely gorgeous. That is a transportive track right there. Yeah, Between Worlds sounds right here. Not just because we're merging more classical ideas with jazzier ones and jazz fusion ones, but also because I feel like so much of this track sounds like moving to somewhere else. Not necessarily the end result, you know, the transportation process being between the places. It captures so much whimsy to it. There's so much movement going on too, despite the fact that this entire track is chill. Not one part of this feels incredibly driven. There are certainly more momentous sections to it, but overall, I'd say it's a fairly laid back track. So the fact that it gives any feeling of movement at all, I think, is pretty impressive. To me, that says that there's something that I'm just not going to be able to pick up on a first time listen. Maybe it is specific harmonic choices, chord progressions going on in here. It could be layers that are heard, or I should say felt, but not heard. They inform the atmosphere, they inform the emotional element, but they're kind of hidden in the mix a bit, or maybe just not as emphasized as a different instrument that is more in the lead. Could be little things that I'm missing, but this track feels like it is always moving toward the destination, but we never really get there until the end, and that's when everything sort of chills out, calms down. We are no longer between worlds, but we have landed on our destination. And yeah, just a very cool feeling throughout. I do want to take a little focus, though, on this classical versus jazz thing, because I do feel that the classical side wins out on this. This is a track that feels incredibly informed by Romantic era classical composition. It does a fantastic job at pulling together vibes and textures, atmospheres in order to create emotions and feelings, and not necessarily... How do I describe this? Romantic era music is mostly about capturing ideas and transforming them into sonic displays, right? What does a forest sound like? 9 times out of 10, that's going to be Romantic era style classical. And that's exactly what we get here. I think it's where a lot of the whimsy comes in from. But it also feels transportative. Transportive? It feels like I'm being transported. And a lot of that is because we're taking non-musical ideas and trying to figure out the best way to showcase that through the sounds of these instruments rather than through specific musical ideas. Right? We're not looking at counterpoint specifically. We're not looking at theming and motif, although there are some pretty cool themes in here. We're not looking at any specific devices used within composition. It's mostly about choosing the right instruments at the right time with the right chords to craft a specific emotion. There is going to be complexity in there. Classical music just has historically enjoyed more complex writing. But the complexity isn't the key element. It's not what most people are going to pick up on their first time listen. It's going to be the atmosphere, the emotion. That's usually a pretty good signifier that we're in Romantic era style writing. Although modern and postmodern kind of have those ideas too, especially when you start looking at composers like Einaudi who love to create atmospheric pieces. So there's definitely, as usual when it comes to genre, some bleed over between, connecting genres, things that are similar or maybe divided only primarily by time. But yeah, so much of this track feels emotive to me, which is a little different than what I expect from Snarky Puppy. Every time I've listened to them, do they capture emotion? Absolutely. But is it what I'm paying attention to most from them? Not usually. This is a band who is full of virtuosos, and I'm usually there for the technical performance, listening to the sick harmonic movements in the solos, listening to the technical performances of the lead instruments, the solo instruments, the percussion. And I pointed out quite a few technical, really cool technical moments in here too. Primarily from the drummer. The drummers were sneaking in some really cool stuff in here. But for the most part, this doesn't feel as technically focused as Snarky Puppy's compositions, or at least the few that I've heard tend to focus on. And that doesn't mean it's completely devoid of them, but maybe it's secondary to the atmospheric components And again, one of those things I might pick up more on during a second listen when I know what I'm in store for and I'm kind of searching underneath that surface level to see what else is here. But I do find that there is a very strong component that Snarky Puppy probably has on this composition here, where it's incredibly rhythmically technical. This kicked off the opening of the track and showcased this really cool 5 idea that I originally felt in 3, and wouldn't surprise me if that 3 somehow socketed into the 5, because the tempo of the 5 felt a little different than the 3, which means it might have been polymetric. Regardless, everything after that intro of this track is definitely in a 5 pulse. I'd say that the intro is probably in 5 as well. But the 5 gets subdivided into a plethora of different ways. Sometimes it feels like 5, sometimes it feels like 3. There was at one point that I was trying to figure out what was going on there, and we had broken up 2 bars of 5, so 10, into, I think it was 3, 2, 2, 3, which is really interesting. Usually you'll stick with a 3-2 idea or a 2-3 idea because they both have different pushes and pulls. The 3 tends to feel like you're in it for a little longer. The 2 feels like you rush through it. To alternate that, it shifts up the general cadence, the general pulse of the song. It makes it feel like it's constantly in flux. Rather than alternating between 2 states, you have a heightened state of suspension and a heightened state of being rushed because you have the 3-3 back to back with the 2-2. It's a very interesting idea there. But it's not just the general cadence either. When you also listen to what the drummers are doing, I mean, it's polyrhythmic, it's polymetric, it's spicy, it's ornamental. There's lots of flourish going on. The drummers can't just sit on a very standard idea. Neither of them can. And this brings about a ton of interesting ideas. Rhythmically, sometimes it ends up being groovier than expected. Sometimes it's easy to get lost, to not really have a good sense of where we are, and difficult time finding where 1 is. Which I think this is not the first time we've listened to a Snarky Puppy track, and I've had to ask, where's 1? It's very easy to get rhythmically lost in this, which, you know, going with this concept of being between worlds, of being transported, yeah, I think kind of losing your sense of direction makes sense in that. Even the idea of going somewhere you haven't been before, moving to this new world, that's going to be something that you're not familiar with, not going to be your usual signposts, or you're not going to know what sort of landmarks you should be looking at to kind of give you a sense of direction. You're gonna have fresh eyes on this world. And I think that the rhythmic side of this, constantly being in flux, playing around with the general cadence of the 5, but also the drummers dancing around that in a bunch of technical ways, just introduces something that at least rhythmically keeps you on your feet. And I found that to be a really strong element in this track, that paired with the more whimsical, expressive, almost naive, bright-eyed feeling through a lot of this track, added to this sense of wonder and discovery, of being in some place new. Now, this next thing is not going to tie into any larger, you know, like I just said, you know, the rhythm paired with the general composition told me this. No, this is just going to be like a cool thing. I love the instruments here. Some of them might work their way into influencing some of the things I felt while listening to this, but generally it's just cool to see some of these instruments. Like I said at the beginning, I think we kicked off with an oud. But again, if I'm wrong, let me know. It's definitely something in the lute family, but I don't think that's a Western instrument there. So if I am wrong, I do want to know. Please correct me. It's the only way I'm going to learn. We also saw some non-Western drums in here as well. I have no idea what cultures they come from. I don't know the names of them. They all look like hand drums though, which is pretty cool because it gives us a very different texture. They're a more rounded sound than the drum kit being hit with the drum sticks, which has more of a sharper crack to it. It's more directed at a specific point of attack rather than a bit of a rounded off reverberance that we hear on the hand drums. Adds a lot of character to this. I think that's pretty cool, but I think it's just awesome that it's there at all, because once all the layers start coming in, some of the instruments just kind of get lost in the general atmosphere, but still the decision to use those rather than other types of hand drums or other types of drums in general. I mean, we probably could have went for, I don't know, snares with the, the snares turned off. We could have just said, hey, we'll use some toms there, and maybe we'll use a bundle of sticks rather than a drumstick in order to get a softer sound. And honestly, the end result probably wouldn't have been too different. But the fact that they said, no, we're going to have these instruments. Now, part of this could just come down to Metropole Orkest. Maybe this is just the instruments they use, and it was less about choosing them than just having the instruments on hand. Regardless, I'm still happy that these instruments are in there. Another one that I thought was interesting was the soprano sax, which you just don't see too often. It was our solo instrument. It looked like a saxophone, but it was completely straight, like a clarinet. It has the sax flavor, the sax color, but it's higher pitched than your alto and your tenor saxes. Not a completely uncommon instrument, but not something you see too often either. So I was really happy with that. There's probably a ton of other instruments I'm forgetting or maybe didn't hear. I wasn't watching the video 100% of the time, so maybe I didn't see them either. I do think that it's really awesome just that they had so many instruments here, though. Towards the end of the track, it kind of panned out and showed everything. And so many strings, so many woodwinds. We got the brass. We had those cool, they look like straight mutes on the, well, actually not straight mutes because they had the flange at the end, the flare out on the trombones though. But still, it had like a latching thing. Is that just so they don't fall out? I don't know. I wonder if that's a specific type of mute or if it's just a different visual for straight mute. Anyways, we had that. We had like, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 keyboards and pianos in there. We have the harp that we have right there at the end of the track. That kind of got lost in the mix a little bit throughout the song, but I love how it was still present at the end as one of the last remaining sounds, as the harp is just absolutely beautiful. And I think it brings a lot of the serenity and calm to the track that matches the whimsy and, again, that sort of wide-eyed naivety, the magic of being somewhere new. And it's just a good instrument for that. So to end the track on that one, that's a really great choice. Again, there's just probably a few instruments I'm not remembering here, but I just love the general plethora here. There's so many different textures and sounds and timbres going on this track. Speaking about all of this, you'd think that it'd be kind of tough to get all of it in one song. But I think that the way that they go about doing layers on this works really well. I'd mentioned at one point that it is a lot of little things coming together into a really big thing. This is a track that is 100% greater than the sum of its parts. But it also finds complexity through simplicity. If you listen to any of the instruments, you really try to isolate them out with your ear. And you say, what specifically are the trombones doing at this moment? It's usually not complex. It's a little rhythm. Maybe they'll have some movement to it. But for the most part, a lot of this track is made up of smaller 1 to 2 bar ostinatos that are just repeated over and over and over. The complexity comes by what are you going to stack on top of that? What are you going to pull out of that? And so the song can naturally and almost organically grow and shrink, not by changing what anyone's playing, but adjusting what's being played simultaneously. This is how the song can evolve as smoothly as it does, as you can layer a bunch of ideas in, pull out some of the old layers, and then stack those instruments on top with new ideas. You pull the bottom ones out, give them new ideas, and now you've gradually changed it. You haven't distinctly said this was an A section, this was a B section, everyone changed at one time, but you're subtly, swap two instruments out, swap one instrument out, swap another two out, and as you bring them back in, you're kind of ship of Theseusing this, where you're subtly adding new ideas where old ones were. And it allows the song to naturally grow and evolve in ways that make sense because 80% of it at any given time are the same that it was just, 16 bars ago, 40 seconds ago. This core is the same, but these ideas are different. And so that's a subtle adjustment. You keep doing that over time, and you end up in somewhere completely different, which kind of reminds me of this idea of transporting between worlds. In more of a sci-fi perspective, I suppose, the idea of being broken down into particles to be transported somewhere else and then reconfigured, sort of like, Star Trek transporters or something like that. The old Willy Wonka transporter. But this idea of, being broken down into small pieces, moved somewhere else and put together in a similar order, hopefully the same order, I guess, but in a different place. And this idea of subtly moving small parts around fits that idea really well, and moving from one atmosphere to another through this process. Yeah, pretty sick stuff. I think that's going to be about it. I mean, this is just a journey of a track, and I had an absolute blast with it. Is there more to this, though? Yep, I see there is. There's another track called The Curtain, another one called Waves Upon Waves. Yeah, I'm going to have to look more into this. Oh, one called... Oh, no, that's something else. I got to look more into Snarky Puppy in general because their songs have been consistent highs for me. But I feel like this concert right here, I need to watch all of. And I'm sure some of you are going to want to be on that journey with me. I'll find a way to... I'll see how many there are. If there's only like 3 or 4 more ahead of me, I may just put it all into one video and just toss it up randomly someday. If it's going to be a longer thing, I'm going to have to figure out how to work it into the schedule. But I had a blast with this. I'm glad I finally got to check this out. It just makes me even more giddy to dive more into this collaboration here. These are my thoughts on Snarky Puppy and Metropole Orkest's Between Worlds, conducted by Jules Buckley. What did you think of this? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Do you have your own thoughts, opinions, or perspective about this? Do you have your own take on this? Let me know. Put all of that down into the comment section along with anything else you'd like to add. Above that in the description box is a link for Linktree. It'll take you here. You can find ways to support my channel, a link to my music, a link to the Discord server, so much more. Go ahead and check that out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all 3 of those. That wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC, as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.